What's our averages? And that's important to see, because as a result, we still need people in these positions doing the job. So we need to know, how many people are leaving. And it's always good, in my opinion, if you can, is to get why they're leaving. You probably heard the old saying that people don't leave their jobs, they leave their bosses and things like that. But there's a myriad of reasons that people leave a position. So take the time. If somebody's going to get off your department, whether it's volunteer and they're just resigning for some reason, or if somebody is resigning from their job within the organization, try to take time to have an internal exit interview. Ask them questions. Ask them what were they needed. I can tell you with on-target preparedness, we have that ourselves. Even though we have a pretty low turnover rate, we have that, so that way that we can get better. Is there something that we failed at, or is this something that is just a situation that something didn't work out for that volunteer or for that member? And so that helps us with the next part of this attracting the effective workforce, and that's forecasting our staff needs. And there's a lot that can go into this. It's everything from, are we adding services to our organization? I remember, again, back in Bush Creek, we many years ago, I believe it was 1998 or 9, if I'm not mistaken, show some years on me, when we started going from a first responder system to having an actual full-blown transport system of EMS, to where we actually had 2 ambulances that we would transport EMS patients. So as a result, we started having to look at that and go, we're going to be running more calls because we're doing more services. The same thing could be said about call volume. It could be that your call volume is increasing at a rapid pace. So the bottom line is that provides us that foundation to know where are we and where are we going. That leads us to the actual active part of the recruitment strategy. So we've got to look at it from, how are we going to get the best bang for our buck when we're trying to recruit? So that could be anything from just having an open house one afternoon at the fire station, or it could be having a special event at the rescue squad, whatever it could be, and just let people know what it is you're looking for. It could be going to events. We do an event every year at Campbell University, which is in the First Due area of Bush Creek Fire Rescue. And what we will do is we will set up a tent and have little giveaways. We'll talk about fire safety, but we also do some recruitment strategies during that, because we have always had a decent amount of college students who were on the department while they were going to college. So we give them that benefit. Now, as we have reviewed this recruitment strategy with this, is we realized that we were wasting plenty of paper and things to that nature when we took applications to this event. So we stopped doing that. But we went down there, we let people know that we were there, that we were looking for members, and that we'd be more than happy to look into them becoming a member of our department. So we've got to sit there and spend some time on looking at what's going to be your best recruitment strategy. Maybe it's putting it in the local paper every so often and just say, hey, this is our organization, if we're looking for volunteers, or we're hiring staff using third-party agencies. I think one of them's like monsters.com or monsterjobs.com, something to that effect. Maybe a lot of people in your area use those types of websites. So consider using those. Now, once you get the recruitment stuff down, then we go into a part where it's mainly focused on the career side, but can also be used for the volunteer side, is kind of testing, interviewing, and selecting the members that we want to be on the department. And I'm not saying to willy-nilly select these members, if you will. That's not what we're wanting to do. But we want to make sure that if we're paying for them, whether it be volunteers and us paying workers' comp and things to that nature, to us actually hiring people for their job, we need to know what their abilities are. And we've got to understand that there's a difference between abilities that we can teach and those we can't. Most people can be taught how to drag a hose, but we can't truly teach things such as a hard work ethic or initiative. So those are things we have to look at as we go through that. So, we need to know what kind of knowledge, skills, and abilities that they have. And make sure that as we're doing any kind of testing, that we are focusing on the job itself. That is one thing over the history of the fire service that's gotten us in more trouble, is when we sit there and try to base these tests on what we want it to say. Well, we need it to make sure that it's what we want it to say or test, but it's also got to be linked to the job itself. So make sure that the test is valid and reliable for that, which means that it's testing what we want and that it's going to give us concurrent answers if similar people take the same type of test. So at that point, we should be looking at, at a pretty good, attraction in terms of recruiting these people. The hope is even with volunteers that you get to a point like we've been at here with Woods Creek Fire Rescue several times, to where you're not accepting any new members right now, and you can now be selective even with your volunteers. Because again, we want those who are dedicated and who have initiative and things to that nature. And so that comes with having a very good recruiting process from there. So the next step, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, is developing that effective workforce. So how do we do that? Well, like I mentioned, first and foremost, that I'm a big supporter of is training. We've got to train our staff on what their job is. I cannot tell you the number of times where, whether it be in emergency management, whether it be in the fire service, where people generally would quit, resign, retire early because they never got a clear picture of what their job really was. And on the opposite scale of that spectrum, most of the time, if you told them what their job was, even if it was dangerous, even if it was something that they're not used to doing, most of the time people are willing to do that. But we've got to make sure we train them. And look at how trainings can impact your organization as a whole. So, for example, there's times where I've had staff come to me and ask me, could they go and attend a training that was not 100% directly linked to what we do. And there's times that I've pretty much just said, go, try it. We'll see what happens. And we've got to look at it from the aspect of how could that possibly impact us? It could be that somebody wants to go get a Microsoft certification and that ends up being something that could help us. It could be that they start coming back and teaching us as firefighters how to properly use some of the Microsoft Office programs, or it could be that that person being trained now has a role for that. But look at that from the aspect of training for their job and then training that's going to help them advance, help them get better, and help them pull a niche for themselves for the organization. And leading to that, we've got to talk about advancement. So one of the things that I always support is the idea of being honest and truthful with the staff and volunteers as to what they can expect in terms of advancement. Even if it's a bad situation, even if it's something where, the likelihood of you advancing at this point is going to end up being 20 years from now. Well, they're a lot less likely to leave when they know that, because they can accept that. But if they have this constant, maybe this time, you're going to sit there and see that volunteers or career staff are going to get really tired of that hope that gets destroyed every time. So be honest with them. Tell them what they can expect. Tell them how to advance. Let them know what steps to get there. And then help them with the performance appraisals. And be honest and fair with these, and tailor them to the position, and make it a two-way conversation. The whole point of advancement and performance appraisals and all of that is to make it where the person gets better at their job. Now, I can imagine some of you may be saying, well, you can't do a performance appraisal on a volunteer. And I would disagree with you. You can. you just have to make sure that you have expectations for that person. For example, you could say, okay, during the first 6 months of you being on the department, we expect you to come to as many trainings and to as many calls as you can. Assuming a volunteer position here, of course, like we're going down that line. So we give them that. After 6 months, how did they do? Well, they're hitting 20% of our fire calls, and they've been to 90% of all the trainings we've had in 6 months. Wow, that's pretty good. So we now have seen that they have met or exceeded what we really wanted to see. Then give them, then have a process lined out. Okay, now maybe it's to become compliant with NFPA 1403 so they can be a qualified firefighter to go interior and to actively fight fire and things to that nature. And give them that strategy on how to advance to get that. Have some type of checkoff for 1403, or if your department requires it to be taken during classes, well then show them how to get that done. But constantly do that, because all you're doing is you're building up your department even better as you're developing this workforce. And that should be a constant process. This is not something that's going to end. This is something that every so often, generally is done about once a year, that you take the time to really try to advance and appraise the staff to really better themselves. So take advantage of that, be honest, be fair, and be upfront with them. Now let's talk a little bit about maintaining that effective workforce. So as I talked a little bit earlier in the podcast, we talked about discipline. And discipline is a hard thing to do, especially in the fire service, where we have to realize that we are very closely interconnected as family, but how we still have to be the boss sometimes. So we need to make sure that we focus all of our discipline on improving the employee and correcting behavior. One of the things that I have learned through my years of being a manager and overseeing staff is that anytime we're doing discipline, it's only to change their behavior. If you're starting to see that you feel like, or people are suggesting to you that it is more of a retribution kind of thing to the employee, then you really need to take a step back, because the point of discipline is not to punish somebody, but it is to change their behavior to where they follow the rules. Sometimes that could be just as simply as having a stern conversation, a two-way conversation. Or it could be that once it happened, the person realized that they did something wrong, and the only discipline you need to do is just sit down and have just a simple chat with them. Or it could be that they do something that is so horrible that you actually have to suspend or terminate that volunteer or career employee. And that happens. There's times, for example, if we do something that greatly breaks the trust of our citizens, that's something we can't recover that easy from. So we're going to have to take the time to consider that, and we may have to do some major discipline with that. But again, make sure that that's focused on improving the employee or the volunteer, and it's not done to punish or to hurt the employee. And make sure that there's no favoritism and there's a clear rule violation. One of the things I've seen so many times is that when somebody may have broke a rule, they will sit there and get punished for it, and there was nothing clearly, it wasn't a clear line of what they broke or what they did wrong. So we need to make sure that there's a clear rule violation and handle it from there. And if it's not clear, then maybe we need to look at our departmental policies, fix those up, and make it where it is more clear so we can have a leg to stand on, if you will, with that. So with discipline, there's, that's a supervisor to employee kind of effective workforce issue. But let's talk about, another aspect, which is grievances between